Hello and welcome everyone. It's an honor to be the moderator of the session titled Fleet Renewal and Fuels, a Reality Check. I'm delighted to introduce you a great lineup of distinguished panelists with me. We have Sanne Henriksen, head of the IMO and EU Public and Regulatory Affairs, AP Moller. We have, sorry for that, Hamish Norton, president of Starbucks. We have Marie-Caroline Laurent, Group Senior Vice President, Head of Government Affairs and Maritime Policy, MSC. We have Zografakis, partner, Stephenson, Harwood, and William Fairclough, Managing Director of Kwong Maritime Transport. Now, the IMO Net Zero framework is getting closer to adoption, but still there are key questions that remain unanswered. Will it be enough to trigger meaningful change? Do ship owners or are ship owners adjusting their strategies accordingly to meet these new goals? And will the fuel producers ramp up production of green fuels on time, or will we end up in that chicken and egg dilemma? Well, with our panelists today, we have a lot of experience across the shipping value chain and energy space, and we are going to try to cover the readiness of the fleet, the role that new technologies and new fuels will take, and the factors that will make or break the transition in this decade. So let's get into it. So this is a question to all of you. Will the net zero framework be enough on its own to trigger meaningful fleet renewal? Or do you think that we require additional incentives and market signals to get this done? Maybe, Sanne, we can start with you.
Sure, yes. Good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be here. Yes, well, in short, as we see it, it's certainly a critical milestone, and if adopted in October, it can provide this global direction for all of us that the industry have been asking for many years. So a lot of work ahead also with the guidelines afterwards, but certainly, and even though it's not perfect, it can definitely accelerate the transition.
Thank you. What do you think?
We are hoping that it goes through. We welcome complex, difficult to comply with regulations because basically we're much bigger than most of our peers in the dry bulk industry, and we can afford a large compliance department, and we can afford to be in compliance with some very complex regulations. I think it's going to be very, very chaotic. I don't think there's a hope that biofuels with any sort of objective amount of carbon savings are going to be available in the amounts that people will demand. And frankly, I think that we'll be in a situation where people are paying fines until there's ammonia available to run ships, and that ammonia has been proven and has become safe, which I think is a while. But it's as Chris Wernicke said, it's probably being adopted earlier than it is technologically ready to be adopted. But I think, from our point of view, we want it to happen.
Thank you. It's very good to have front runners in the industry to learn and push this forward. Marie-Caroline?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And indeed, a framework is absolutely necessary. It will give a price signal by pricing your ton of carbon and justifying, or at least being able to integrate this into your business case for investment. And it is also necessary to give a common clarity and framework in terms of what are those fuels we're talking about. So having a common certification scheme that provides clarity, guarantee on where our investment should go, what is acceptable to government, what are those definitions of Z and Z fuel is absolutely necessary from a private sector perspective to provide the right incentive and clarity, long-term clarity as much as possible. However, back to your question, this is not the only thing that will make it happen. And I think this is the experience we see in Europe already with the implementation of FuelEU Maritime and ETS. Governments have adopted those regulations, but they might have forgotten that this also means investment into their port infrastructure, into their fuel infrastructure, and inclusion of maritime into their own energy policy and renewable energy plans. So these things need to go together. We need a global framework. We need global rules and clarity on certification, on pricing of CO2. But we also need to have on the ground, in the ports, in the countries, clear policy, energy policy, infrastructure policy, infrastructure investment that align with those objectives as well.
Thank you very much. Aris?
I'm a maritime lawyer, so I would like to answer the question as if I were in front of a judge, and the judge asks me, will the net zero framework be enough on its own to trigger meaningful fleet renewal? And I would have to answer, no. If you look at what meaningful means in the context of bulk shipping, you're looking at tens of thousands of ships. Now, will the framework be enough on its own, asks the judge, to trigger meaningful fleet renewal? And by fleet renewal, I assume we mean dual fuel or single fuel alternative ships, alternative powered ships. So it would not be enough. We have to be honest with ourselves and with the imaginary judge. Why will it not be enough? Because fleet renewal, if you're going to, I'm not a ship owner or a businessman, but I imagine that that kind of capital investment requires risk assessment, technological risk, regulatory risk, legal risk, which is different to regulatory risk, commercial risk, market risk. Is that risk assessment today or in November after the adoption, presumably in October, would that risk assessment be enough for meaningful fleet renewal? So my answer is no.
Thank you so much for providing that perspective. It's important to look at it from every angle. Thank you. William, what about you?
Thanks. I'm not a maritime lawyer, so I won't give such a legal answer, but I wear two hats, I suppose. One as a ship owner, and the other as we have a business focused on fuel procurement for alternative fuels in China and marine electrification. So it's very much about where these fuels are going to be made, how the availability of fuels will be for the market. And I think right now it's very clear that a lot of the big investments within China around the plants that will manufacture these fuels. And you have to say that a lot of that capital is quite agnostic. It doesn't necessarily have to be methanol or ammonia, even hydrogen-based. And electrification is another big part of the sort of decarbonisation on maritime. And all of that whole infrastructure is waiting with bated breath for the outcome of this to make those key investments in digging holes in the ground. For that sort of thing. So everything has slightly gone on hold because, I think if it doesn't go ahead, then it is going to affect the trajectory as we see it. Now, of course, is it enough on its own? No, there needs to be a whole lot of other things that support that, but it is a catalyst. It's a trigger for a lot of those other things that will take place. And I think later you will ask about this sort of chicken and egg. It's the age-old question: is who's going to build the ship or the fuel first? We know from that jurisdiction within China that there's huge policy tailwinds towards building alternative fuels. It's a massive part of the national policy. In some cases, ground has already been broken, despite the fact even the FID hasn't taken place, and you think, how is that even possible? It doesn't seem logical, but when within the context of that sort of central national policy tailwind. Is what's happening, and that's what has been happening. And I think there's been an anticipation that, we're getting to this point, but there is now a definite cooling down of activity and a slowing down to see what happens next. And so I do think it's quite important from the effect of the trajectory of, all these other things that need to happen, which we've heard about.
Thank you. I'm going to stay with you from a ship owner's perspective.
Yeah.
So how are you and how do you think are ship owners adjusting their investment strategies? Do you order new building? What design do you choose? What do you do with your older vessels? How are you approaching that?
So I'll put my other hat on. Yeah, I think the important thing to do is to look at what people have done rather than what they have said or say they're going to do. And, it's pretty clear that the uncertainty has impacted ordering activity in some sectors a lot more than others. You could argue equally cargo is as important as the fuel. If we look at the significant order books, the container market, I'm not going to say too much with Marie-Caroline on the on the panel because she knows a lot more about it than me, but you've got an enormous container order book. They've got complete certainty on the cargo. They're going to be moving boxes for, as long as all of us are here. And that clarity has never wavered. I think there's obviously been challenges around what the fuel type will look like, and you just look at the order book. There's a mixture. There's a lot of LNG. There's methanol, quite a significant number of methanol dual fuel ships. There's optionality. As much optionality as you can build in has been built into the current order book, to the extent where we've seen even changes from orders through negotiations with shipyards. So that, I think, is entirely rational from that sector. LNG is we're going to talk about it as a fuel later, but as a cargo, I think we see tremendous growth over the next 2 decades of LNG as a cargo. The order book is comparatively, relative to the current fleet, enormous. But if you look at the growth in LNG trade that's expected over the next decade and 2 decades, then it's again fairly rational, even though it may not seem there's not much comfort to be taken from that in today's LNG spot market rates. That growth will come. I think everybody's fairly confident of that from the analysts and also from ship owners. So again, when you have an LNG carrier, the fuel is fairly straightforward. You're going to use LNG as a fuel probably. You'll have that capability built in. If you look at the tanker and the bulk carrier industries, I think over the last 5 to 10 years, I don't know quite, maybe 7 years or something like that, definitely the large tanker industry, if we polarize on the large tanker sector, has been relatively underbuilt. And you look at today, the VLCC market, you've got extremely high rates. You've got extremely low order book. And these two things don't normally go hand in hand. And you've got a relatively high new building price, but the rates are they make it just about make sense. And you're starting to see a little bit of a pickup. And I think that's been twofold. Partly there has been a fuel element to that. I mean, we looked at various projects on VLCCs using dual fuel, LNG dual fuel, and it was just too expensive. It didn't make sense, and the underlying freight market didn't support it. And you heard a lot of the listed tanker names talking about this, is the assumptions they were needing to make for the life of that ship in terms of allocating capital into that asset. It just didn't seem like a good investment. But also there was that niggling uncertainty on oil demand, the underlying oil demand on the cargo side. And I think that has, to some extent, softened. I think people now understand the importance of the transition being something that's gradual, and when you have a fleet that's as old as the tanker fleet, you're going to run out of ships unless there's some fleet renewal. So I think we're starting to see a bit more confidence on the cargo side. I think when you look at the bulk carrier market, again, coal is this massive overhang as what point it's going to go. And I think a few years ago, people thought that was the end. People are talking about peak coal, I think, every year for about the last 7 years. Gradually, people are acknowledging there may be a world where we don't have peak coal yet, but that doesn't necessarily mean things aren't happening in the background in terms of, decarbonising, how we get our energy. But coal just plays a part in that transition. So, but you look at the order book, it's definitely had an impact because, relatively speaking, the order book is pretty limited. So I think people are struggling, both on the fuel side and on the cargo side. But arguably, the cargo side has had a bigger impact.
Yeah. Thank you. You want to add from a Starbucks perspective?
From our perspective, basically, we're not placing orders right now. We think new building prices are probably too high. We think the shipyards are very happy with their situation. They've got a lot of orders in the backlog from other sorts of ship owners, container ships, LNG carriers, tankers, and so on. So the dry bulk order book is small and not rising. If we ordered a new building that was fuel oil only, we would probably feel pretty bad after 4 years or so when we start having to pay fines. But if we order a new building which is fuel oil and ammonia, which we'll be able to do with an MAN engine sometime probably within the next few months. We can do that with a WinGD engine now, but nobody has any experience using ammonia as fuel. They have experience carrying it as a cargo, but not pumping it through the engine room, where all the engineers are sitting. Question, would we be able to hire a crew for the first ammonia fueled vessel? It's an interesting question. What do we do about a ship that is the first ammonia design, and then the class societies all say, "Oh yes, we better fix this in the new ships." Will the first design actually be safe? Will it be the second design that is safe? We are basically, when we sell ships that need to be sold for fleet renewal, we are either using the cash to buy back shares which are trading well below net liquidation value of hard assets, or we're saving the cash for future better uses. What we are not doing right now is ordering new buildings.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. Maybe we can go back to a lawyer perspective. Harris and William mentioned the chicken and egg situation, right, with the fuel producers. Do you think that the current demand from shipping is strong enough to encourage those fuel producers to ramp up the alternative fuel production?
Yes, for some things. So there's no doubt that EU ETS and Fuel EU Maritime, and we've had some experience of this already for the last 2 years, there's no doubt that this has increased the demand for biofuels and to a certain extent LNG. So that is something that is obvious for everyone to see. Now, has it increased the demand for green ammonia or green methanol? Probably not. Of course, you have the first movers, you have the demonstration cases, but has it increased the demand? Probably not. It's more of a carbon tax, pay to pollute, than an incentive to change behavior. Now, we've been talking about this chicken and egg idea for several years, but I think it is somehow, in today's world, I think it's a little bit simplistic, because it assumes that everything is equal and all you need to do is create demand and then there's supply. I think that's a bit simplistic if we look at the maritime trade. Because fundamentally, shipping is built on a fuel that is a residual fuel. Shipping does not signal demand for fuel oil. Fuel oil, as a residual fuel, just exists. It's the refining process. The clue is in the term, residual, right? It's the bottom of the barrel. So shipping has been built on that. Shipping is not an industry that signals demand for fuel that is created just for this industry. Aviation is that. But shipping has never been that. So chicken and egg is simplistic. Are we trying to reinvent an industry? Are we trying to deal with the risks? It's more complex than that. So I don't think it is simply a question of demand and supply. It is more complex than that. We need to address all the other challenges. Some of them are regulatory, some of them are legal. I'm involved with the CMI. I'm chairing the CMI group on creating a liability framework for alternative fuels. We don't have that today. So we need to fix that. It's not just chicken and egg of supply and demand.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Very good points. Sanne, views from your side?
Yeah, well, so we have now 17 dual-fueled methanol vessels in operation and some 29 dual-fueled methanol and LNG vessels on order. And we have several off-take agreements also on fuels. So in our perspective, the chicken and egg situation is, we're really beyond that situation now. And waiting for the regulatory certainty that we see. And we also see a lot of potential for fuel production around the world. And in terms of safety, of course, that's a key aspect. And that is also what we believe that it can be managed, and we've shown that. Of course, there's outstanding questions on certain pathways like ammonia, that's clear. But then a note on complying with the IMO framework, which is of course something we're talking about now. That will not be easy, that's clear. But I think we have to remember what the alternative is, right? We have to, it's worth remembering that most countries around the world have some sort of green agenda or green strategy. And if the IMO would not regulate, then certainly there would be unilateral regulations, and many of them. And would these regulations be aligned nicely with targets and scope and metrics? No, of course, states have very many different opinions about this, so they would not be aligned. So that's really important to remember when we talk about complying, that it will not be easy, but the absence of a global framework would certainly be a regulatory mess.
Thank you. Thank you. Very good points as well. Let's go a bit into LNG, one of the fuels that we have today. Maybe Marie-Caroline, from your side, what are your views on that? Is it a transition fuel? Is it a fuel in transition? How do you see it? How does MSC see it?
So obviously LNG is one of the options on the table. I always want to remind ourselves that there is also drop-in biofuel as a solution that should not be forgotten. I know there are some limitations around the volumes available. But today, I mean, beyond going to talk about fleet renewal, the vast majority of our fleets today will need somehow, especially if the trajectory of the IMO framework is confirmed, will need somehow access to some form of drop-in biofuel as well. Just a side note on the conversation.
Thank you.
LNG has been part, and this is something from the MSC group that is quite known. We've gone through quite a lengthy process of studying and evaluating what would be the best option based on our risk, based on the lack of a clear regulatory framework as well. And to date, indeed, the LNG dual fuel investment is prevailing, not just for container fleet, but also for cruise and our ferry fleet as well, as maybe the option that allows us to hedge our bets at this stage the most. It is available, you have infrastructure, It is a known fuel, so in terms of safety, operation, this is something that we can integrate already today. And it has this path of biogas, which again is available today already. We have operated some of our vessels, especially cruise vessels, on biogas produced in Sweden already. And back to the chicken and egg, these are conversations that already are happening today in terms of purchasing biogas, so it's not science fiction. And of course, we are already looking at production of e-LNG. So far to date, and we'll see what the future brings, and indeed, again, clarity around definition of emissions, regulatory framework will be the key element of those future discussions. But to date, we have around 150 vessels on order that are LNG dual fuel. This is the choice we have made as one of the solutions that can take us on a path to zero emission with an e-LNG solution. So again, I will repeat it over and over. Nobody here is claiming we're doing our decarbonization with fossil LNG. That's not what we're talking about. This is more about the technology that is proven, available, with volumes already on the market, that can help us initiate our transition. And again, I think we're trying to be very ambitious here, and I commend the maritime sector to always be very strict with themselves when setting up a target and trying to reach for it. But it's a long journey, so we need to also start now with what we have available, LNG, biofuel, any form of already solution that is on the market, and build a path that will eventually take us to zero.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. Very interesting. Sanne, maybe back to you. What other pathways are ship owners taking in order to advance in the decarbonization journey in terms of retrofits, wind-assisted propulsion, onboard carbon capture and storage?
Yeah, so we see it very much as a sort of multi-fuel, multi-technology pathway future for shipping. As Marie-Colline also said, we have to use all the options available now and for the future. There will likely be many developments the coming years. So in terms of LNG, as I mentioned, we have also expanded, diversified our orders of dual fuel vessels to include both methanol and LNG, and likely there will be other options for the future. So very much a multi-fuel pathway. As was said also, of course, LNG is a fossil fuel, so we cannot get around that. So that alone will not get us to net zero, but we have it as a part of transitioning to the green options that are also available, biomethane and so on. So yes, very much calling for a multi pathway. And in terms of other technical developments, we're also looking at retrofits and have also retrofitted already a conventional ship to a dual fuel methanol vessel. So that's also one of the many options that we are getting learnings from right now.
Thank you. I think we need to start wrapping up. So I would like to hear from all of you, starting from maybe you, William. In one sentence, what's the single factor that you believe will break or make the transition in this decade?
Well, I think it has to be driven by regulation, because the availability of fuels is often cited as a reason why it's difficult to make big investments without certainty on the regulation, on the availability of the supply chain to supply those fuels. We've talked about all the different mixes, but reality is quite topical. The LNG discussion around certain academic views that LNG is just not the answer versus the much more pragmatic industry view, saying it has to be part of the answer. Really, regulation is what gives clarity to the capital allocators, and those are the guys who are going to go out and order the assets, and the end users will obviously indirectly finance that transition. And it comes back to everybody. you know, who is a user of shipping, which, as we know, is literally everybody. So I think the regulation is going to be the crucial factor, as I see it.
Thank you so much. Harris?
Well, I agree, obviously, everybody would agree with William. The regulation is key within a certain timescale. But if we're looking at the timescale, and I think your question was about this decade.
This decade, yes.
Unfortunately, we're already at the end of 2025. So for this decade, the stage is set. No matter what happens in October and so on, the stage is set. So to make the targets of 2030, there's only one thing that can take us there, and that is energy efficiency, plus biofuels, plus LNG if you have one of the few ships that has the dual fuel capacity. So this is the decade of energy efficiency. If we succeed in making our ships more energy efficient this decade, everything will be a little bit easier in the 2030s. But the expectation that somehow the regulatory framework this decade will allow deployment at scale of alternative fuels, I think that expectation is not realistic. That will be for the following years, after the 2030s.
Thank you. Marie-Caroline?
Maybe building on what William has said, I would just add a global regulation and a single one, because what today already is breaking us, into your question, is having 5 different jurisdictions with 5 different definition of fuel processes. So we need a global framework. I would almost say whatever it is, but a global and single framework that then gives us the rule of the game globally for industry to operate and to invest. Today, back to the conversation, we are holding investment because of that uncertainty of not knowing what will be the global rule applicable to those requirements, fuel, but even efficiency measures, to be honest. If you don't have a clear target and a clear framework,